Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Alex from Alex Creates Music, and today we're going to take a look at how to produce a song like the band Def Havana. They're a band I really like and have been listening to for a while, and they just put out some new music. So I wanted to write a track that used a lot of the same production elements that they use and see what I could come up with. So let's go ahead and take a quick listen to the song. I'm going to play the intro, the second chorus, and then the outro to let you hear what that sounds like. So we're going to take a look at a lot of the elements that I use to produce something in this vein. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Alex. I'm a primarily rock and pop music producer. Listen to a lot of alternative rock, punk rock, metal, hardcore, different vein of a lot of things. So if you're an artist who has some music that you're looking at getting fully produced out, mixed and mastered, please let me know. I'd love to help out. So for Def Havana, a lot of their songs are going to be in about the mid 120s to the mid 150 BPM. So as you can see here, I've got this at 153 because a lot of the songs that I like from them are around that kind of faster tempo. A large part of their sound, obviously, is going to be the guitars. Both of the guys in Def Havana use Fender guitars, from what I can tell. And these are going into an overdriven amp. So what I'm using in this session is going to be the Archetype Nolly in the Marshall model from Neural DSP. I don't have the gain set too high, but I do have an overdrive pedal in front of it that's really just kind of cleaning up the mids. And you can also achieve this tone through something like a Fender amp or even a Vox AC30. Now, while the rhythm guitars are going to be fairly dry and not really having effects from them, the lead guitar is going to be a little different. It's going to be slightly less overdriven, but you can also get away with a little more distortion in the solos just for the last part of the song, which is what I did. But really for the lead, you're going to want to use a lot of delay and reverb. So if I just solo the lead here, you can hear it's got some reverb. There's a ping pong delay going back and forth to create a bigger sense of width. Merged in with the rhythm guitars, it creates a pretty big wall of sound there. Sounds nice and open. And then really what Def Havana did on their last album is they started incorporating a lot more production elements into their writing. So with this, I have this kind of combined with a bunch of different synthesizers and keyboard pads. So if I loop the intro here, I'll step you through some of these. A lot of their songs use fairly standardized, just basic piano chords, but they have a really cool reverberant sound and are quite upfront in the mix. So if you listen to this, those keyboard chords that I've got going on in the background are really just a patch through Contact 5. This is the giant piano, which as the name implies, sounds pretty big. I've really compressed a lot of this and then added some chorus on it to give it that extra space and width. And then for the melody, this is just a little pluck sound that I've got built in Ableton. And this really just mirrors the lead guitar tone. Creating the main melody from there. But you can hear if I take out the keyboard part that's duplicating the melody, you lose a little bit of that presence and kind of that stereo width. So those add up, and then when you add in the keys, gives you a nice big open sound, which is a huge part of their sound. So the second part of the electronics here are going to be a lot of these synthesizer pads. As you can see here, I've got about 4 tracks going on at various parts of the song. Here's what they sound like by themselves. And then later on. So if I go through these, basically this is just a simple saw wave pad. I've got some strings in here that I've split into 3 different sections, so it sounds like a nice full orchestra. Some violins, cellos. This I'm using the BBC Symphony Orchestra. And then lastly, the Contact 5. I believe the session strings too. Yep, I've got the smart voice split. So once you program a chord, this is a cool way for it to kind of split it intelligently with the lower notes for the lower instruments and the higher notes for the higher instruments like a violin. So in combination, those sound like a wider sort of orchestra. I've also got this organ here. This is just the basic default patch of the Universal Audio Waterfall B3 organ. Sounds really great. And then lastly, I have this choir in here, which kind of sounds like a synthesized voice, which is actually what it's called, synthetic choir. So in combination with these keyboards and the pads, it gives it that real kind of ethereal, airy tone. So if I just play them all here at once with everything going on in the track. It almost sounds very worship music-like, and a lot of that is because, again, with their last album, they used a lot of like gospel influence. They even had a gospel choir on there. So fun fact, for a lot of these songs, you can actually kind of mute the vocals. In this case, it doesn't have vocals, but you can mute the vocals, take out some of the guitars that are a little more aggressive sounding, and maybe slow down the tempo. And you've got a pretty easy template for a worship song, so there you go. So really, when you add in a lot of the electronic production like that, where you have your synth pads and some of the larger keys, you get a pretty wide and open sound that still sounds pretty rocking because of the guitar. So if we listen to just the guitars and the production. So with this, once you add in the bass, it gives it a little more of that low end response. So if we just play that here. So next, if we add in the drums by themselves sound like this. I've got a percussion track layered in here just to add a little bit of movement to it. So the next element with that, once we bring in the drums, here's what they sound like on their own. And then I have a shaker layered in here just to give it some extra movement. Those drums are fairly open sounding. They're very big sounding. And as you can see, I've used a lot of the room mics in this mix, just comparatively to a lot of the other levels that are balanced in this. So again, that goes hand in hand with the delay and the reverb that's going to be used on the guitars and the keyboard parts to just give this real expansive sound. So if we listen to that with the rest of the song. So listening to the bass on its own, we can hear it's fairly overdriven. It's got a good bit of dirt to it. So I'm using this plugin here to accommodate that, which is really just a plug-in version of if you've got the Tech 21 bass overdrive pedal, kind of does the same thing. So with that, it's a really tight sounding but kind of gritty bass that combines really well with the guitars. So if I combine that with the guitars here, provides a really good sonic foundation that kind of covers the whole frequency range. So if we take a look at some of the songwriting elements, as you can see from this session, it's not really too long of a song just for demo purposes, but I have a chorus, same chorus, an outro that's got a little bit of variance to it, and then just a verse and an intro. Got a little pre-chorus leading into the second one as well. So a lot of their songs will start out with a melody, whether that's coming from the guitar or the keyboard, which is fairly typical, but there's a lot of songs they have, like say Fever, that comes with the bass as the main melody. So the intro is going to be usually fairly sparse, and it's going to lead into the big orchestration where everything comes in at the main first chorus. So again, with the intro, it's not really drums yet. It's just the main melody on there and the main big sounding chord. So when it drops into the chorus, it sounds a lot bigger once everything comes in. Now with the verses, there's a lot of really cool things you can do just to play around with the movement of the song. So obviously hearing it from the chorus going into the verse, it kind of goes from a high energy level to bringing it real low. A trick you can do here is I'm actually playing the drums on here, but I'm really only doing the hi-hat. And then the snare is actually an electronic sample. So it creates a really good kind of hybrid electronic kit that really blurs that line between acoustic and electronic, which is something I think this band is really good at doing. Now for the second part of the verse, you can hear this is where the full-on acoustic drums take in. And what you can also do in that, in terms of the first half of the verse, you hear it's really just drums, bass, and that little pad in the background that I've got going on here, this pad, strings, and the organ. The guitar is going to kick in the second half of the verse right here. And then I've got the same thing, just panned a little bit to the right. So with that, again, the verse is neat because you want to bring in a lower dynamic to give a stark contrast between the chorus and the verse. But in the second half of the verse, you can kind of add in a little bit more spice to it, which is where the guitars come in. Those are just playing some cleaner chords that are mimicking the main chord progression in the choruses. And then the pre-chorus is really just kind of setting up going into that next chorus. So in here, I've got the drums completely out. It's just an electronic kick and snare leading into that, and then a just kind of tom hit that goes into the chorus. Now, another cool trick that's in a lot of Def Havana songs is that oftentimes the bass and the guitar, although they're playing the same progression, they're kind of playing it at different intervals. So if we listen to just the bass and the drums, you can hear they lock in pretty well when the bass is hitting a note. The kick drum is also playing. So you've got a really cool groove. The guitars, however, the rhythm guitars, are just kind of playing just straight 16th notes on here. So going from that real full orchestration in the chorus, a trick that Def Havana uses a good bit to change things up in the later parts of the song, whether it's the bridge or the outro, in this case I did it in the outro, is you take that guitar sound and you mimic the same timing and syncopation as the bass guitar. So here's what it sounds like in this part of the song. So it really changes the groove and the overall feel. So with that, if we go from the chorus to the outro, you're kind of like, bopping your head along, but then the groove changes, and that's when you can also introduce another element, which in this case, I've got a solo in here. So I'll let you hear what that sounds like. Here I've got those melody plucks coming back in. But yeah, that's a really cool trick that you can do, just creating some contrast while using really the same chord structure. It's just the timing and the syncopation of the instruments playing together can create a lot better impact on that and really create a good diverse tonality from the previous section. What I was doing when I was writing this is I actually have this section of the song called Groove Ideas, where I was just jamming along with the different syncopated parts and trying to see what fit the best, changing the drum beat. So looking a little more closely at some of the production elements, as you can kind of already see, I've got my standard drum template for the most part. With this, I've just got your basic microphone setup. I've stripped the silence of the different toms, except for the one part where they come in on the song here. The rooms are up just about as loud as the overhead, so it gives it that really good open sound. And then for the drum bus, I'm really just using, again, this API channel strip, boosting a little bit of highs, cutting out a little bit around 240 where you get some of that low mid mud, and then compressing when the snare hits on this API 2500. Let's take that off. Just rounds it out a little bit more, brings everything together, and adds, to me, a little bit more aggression to the kick and the snare. With the electronic drums, there's nothing too fancy here. I just blended a few samples to get the sound I was going for. I've got a single kick sample. Then I've got an 808 and a clap layered together for the main snare sound. So again, blending those electronic drums with the acoustic set gives it a good kind of hybrid feel. So it's a nod to modern production sounds. Everybody's using an 808 nowadays, so it still sounds cool, but it's in the context of a live instrument, which meshes really well together in my opinion. The bass, it's just a DI into my interface. Like I said earlier, it's going into this bass overdrive pedal. I have it going into this effect rack where I typically blend the DI signal with an amp from Guitar Rig, but for this I'm actually just sticking with the DI. Adding a little bit of EQ, with an SSL style channel strip, boosting the highs, scooping out a little bit of the low mids, giving it a little more low end. It's resonant frequency around 1K I took out. Using the Wave C6 multiband compressor, this clamps down on some of the low end without affecting the top end of the bass, so with and without. Just kind of tightens it up a little bit. Then I'm using the Universal Audio LA2A. This I'm actually not doing any gain reduction. I typically do a little bit on it. But with this, it adds a little bit of harmonic information to it, which is what the LA2A is known for. Back on. This adds a little bit more roundness, for lack of a better term. For the guitars, again, this is a rock song, so you can always have fun stacking a bunch of different guitar parts for this. As I said earlier, a lot of the main tone from my guitars is coming from a Marshall-style amp. So for this, I have my lead and my solo, which are just obviously the lead and the solo. I have my Stratocaster where I use the humbucking pickup in the bridge position and just double track that, panned it left and right. So that's what you end up with here. And then since those are panned out hard left and hard right, I actually added in a harmony on my Telecaster with just playing some octaves and just kept that straight in the middle. So it adds this. Take it out. Back in. So it sounds a little more full. In the verse, I did this clean rhythm. A little bit of delay. Again, using the Archetype Nolly plugin, but this, I have it set to a cleaner style amp. I forget what this was modeled after for the plugin, but it sounds very similar to like a Fender Twin Blackface amp. This may have actually been a Dumble now that I think about it, but don't quote me on that. And then just adding a little bit of delay on that. So it sounds a little bit bigger in the verses with the delay. So for the outro, I actually mimicked what the rhythm guitars are doing through the Marshall amp on here, through this Fender style amp, and it sounds like this. It's also a little higher up on the neck, so the notes sound another octave above what the rhythm guitar is playing. So blend it in. Without. With. Gives a little better top end response. And then really for the lead and the solo, it's that same Marshall style amp and the Nolly Archetype plugin, but I've got some delay on this. So for instance, with the solo, if I turn this back on, here the delay helps it sit a little better in the track and adds it a more bigger feel to it. Then the last part of the song, really all these instruments are just ringing out on an open C chord that I've again played through the Stratocaster on here. I played just an open C chord like on the 1st to the 3rd fret on these cleaner guitars just to give it a different voicing, and then just a single note on the solo. So that combined with also the C chord that's being played on this keyboard and on the bass, it gives it this nice resolution as the last final chord, which sounds like this. And then that just fades out. So the last things I can think of really on this song are just a little bit of automation in certain areas. For this melody that's going on throughout different parts of the song, I have an auto filter pulled up so that on this, it's actually going to be giving a little bit of the high end cutoff on here. You can see down here. And then the reverse of that at the end of the song, as it fades out, it's taking off more of that high end. This makes it sound a little more muted, and it's a good transition to fading out. And then I'm using the Echo Boy Jr. for delay. For the master bus, I typically always do a pretty steep shelf at 30 hertz just to cut off a lot of that low-end rumble that you're not going to hear anyway. Running it through a Townhouse bus compressor. Running it through the Universal Audio Studer tape deck. This kind of softens some of the transients and gives it a little bit more weight in the low mids. And then for my mastering chain, I'm first going into the Universal Audio Chandler Limited Curve Bender, doing some mid-side EQing. So for this, I've got about the same treble boost across both the mid and the sides. I'm doing a little bit more adding of the bass here and taking that out on the side channel just to give it a little bit more width. That kind of balanced out the song a little bit more, gave it a more even tonality that was more concurrent with typical rock releases like this. Going into the Waves C6 compressor, mainly this is reining in the kick and a little bit of the high-end frequencies on the cymbals. I'm adding some extra harmonics with the Ozone 9 exciter. And this is really just in the low mid band where I felt it was lacking. Again, using the Townhouse bus compressor, but with this, I've got it set to a little different settings and a lower ratio. So it's really just kind of smoothing the mix as a whole rather than grabbing the kick and snare transients like the first instance of it on the mix bus. And then lastly, I'm using the Universal Audio Oxford limiter. This is really cool because it's obviously a limiter, but it also adds a little bit of stereo enhancement and some extra harmonic content with this enhanced curve slider. And then I'm really just using this tonal balance control at the end of the track. It doesn't add anything, but it gives you a good visualizer of where your frequency bands are sitting and how those relate to other songs in the genre. I'll let the full thing play through so you can hear what all of it sounds like together. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video, and let me know what you'd like to see more of in the future. And thanks for watching.